We are an employee benefits consulting firm that services the nonprofit and for-profit community with respects to benefits and educating their employees. And if you haven't been part of this series before, it's something we started just about a little over a year and a half ago. We started the Vanguard Employer Education Series, where we would pick topics that we thought were relevant and that our clients and employees had been asking about, and try to bring in top professionals to speak about these topics in an effort to get education out to the community. So today we have a great topic again today, and it's time to plan for long term. And today we have Jim McTighe from the Mass Mutual Agency, who is an expert in life insurance and long-term care planning, and Deirdre Baker from the Makovsky Law Group, who is a trust and estates and elder care attorney. So two great people to speak about this topic today. We have a small group, so feel free to unmute yourself. I'm sure Deirdre and Jim will be willing to take questions along the way and stop to answer anything that you might have. So feel free to take advantage of this expert panel we have today in such an intimate setting. And if you aren't able to do that and still have questions, feel free to type them in the chat. I'll monitor the chat and we'll make sure we get your questions to our experts today. Look out for our next invite that will be coming soon. One hot topic these days is the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan that was put out, and the impact on the COBRA subsidies that are affecting many employers right now. We're getting a lot of questions on that. We've assisted a lot of our clients with their responsibilities on what they need to do. So we're going to bring in a professional from one of our third-party administrators that administers COBRA, and we're going to have a conversation about the employer responsibilities surrounding that. So look out for that invite that will go out in the near future. That said, I am going to turn it over to Jim and Deirdre. Guys, take it away.
All right, Deirdre, you're up.
Great, thanks, Ed. Jim, you can actually go to the next slide, please. So again, thank you for having us, Ed, and welcome everyone. My name is Deirdre, and I'm an elder law attorney located in Garden City. And when I tell people that I'm an elder law attorney, often they say, well, what is elder law? So I think it makes sense to describe elder law as someone who can help you with these 4 topics that you're looking at right now. So the first one is, who's going to make healthcare decisions for me if I become unable to do so? Who's going to handle my finances if I can't handle it myself? How will I pay for long-term care, and what is long-term care? And then finally, how am I going to make sure my stuff, the things that I've worked my life for to accumulate, how am I going to make sure it goes where I want it to go? So obviously that's a lot of information to cover today. So I'm going to be kind of just hitting the important topics, but if you have questions, please let me know or reach out to me or to Ed during the chat. Jim, you can go to the next slide, please. So first up is what we call surrogate healthcare decision making. So if you become unable to make your own medical decisions, you cannot make your wishes known to a doctor, a hospital representative, these are the basic ways that someone else, a third party, can step in and make decisions for you. The most common and the most important, I think, is something called a healthcare proxy, which I'm sure many, if not all of you, have heard of. You may even have them yourself. And basically, a healthcare proxy is a document where you appoint one agent and a successor agent to make decisions in the event you become unable to do so. A healthcare proxy is a very important document. It's also a very easy document to execute. It's not something that you really need an attorney to do. If you do not have healthcare proxies yourself, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to provide you with a template, because there's really no reason for an adult not to have a healthcare proxy. Very often you can appoint a family member, but here you don't need to appoint a family member. So if there's somebody else that you trust, a niece, a nephew, a friend, a neighbor, someone that you think would be the best person to make decisions in the event you're unable to, you can appoint anyone that you choose. The next document is something called a MOLST form, or a medical order for life-sustaining treatment. So this is not a document you would come to an attorney to prepare. It's a bright pink form. It's typically done in a hospital setting, and it's meant to condense and memorialize what your wishes are, and it's meant to travel with you from facility to facility if you're someone who's being transferred. A living will is another common document that you may have heard of. Unlike the healthcare proxy, the living will is not where you're appointing an agent to make decisions for you. Instead, a living will is a document that attempts to anticipate future medical situations, and you list your preferences for what you want or don't want regarding certain treatments or procedures or medications. Our office typically does not prepare or execute living wills for the main reason that it's really difficult to anticipate every type of medical situation you may find yourself in the future. And often a doctor or a hospital will take a lack of provision in your living will as proof that your agent doesn't have the ability to make those decisions for you. So instead, we have language in our healthcare proxy that basically says you've discussed these situations with your agent, and that way your agent can make decisions based on what your current preferences are, as your preferences change. In the absence of a healthcare proxy, if you find yourself in a hospital setting, New York State has something called the Family Healthcare Decisions Act, which basically creates a list or hierarchy of people that can step in and make decisions on your behalf if you're unable to. And it basically focuses really on your blood relationships. So it starts with the spouse, then adult children, then it goes to parents, siblings, and then more remote or more distant relatives like nieces, nephews, cousins. So this is a good thing. It's a nice safety net, but you may not want your children being the one to make decisions. Or what happens if your children can't agree? Now you have 3 children standing in front of a doctor with 3 different opinions about what should happen in a particular situation. So it's a good safety net, but again, I strongly encourage everyone to have a healthcare proxy if you don't already have one. And the last document where surrogate decision-making can be made in a healthcare setting is something called a DNR, or do not resuscitate order. And again, this is not something that you would generally have an attorney prepare for you. It's typically done in a healthcare setting under the guidance or the advice of a medical provider. Jim, you can go to the next slide, please.
Okay.
So the second topic is surrogate financial decision-making. And on the slide here, you have 3 basic ways that decisions can be made on behalf of somebody else. The most common is a power of attorney, also using revocable trusts for asset management during your lifetime. And then finally, guardianship proceedings if other documents are not in place. Go to the next slide, Jim. So first up is a power of attorney. And along with the healthcare proxy, these are documents that are called advance directives, something that you create during your lifetime while you're not in need of help, and you're planning for a potential future incapacity. So in the power of attorney, you appoint at least 1 agent, but you have the ability to appoint more than 1 agent. You can appoint successor agents, and you can list or designate the very specific powers you intend your agent to have, or you can make it a very broad power of attorney, really giving your agent or agents the ability to step in and make most non-medical decisions on your behalf. So things like basic bill paying, Medicaid planning, creating and funding trusts on your behalf, dealing with your insurances, your investments. You really can give your agent a lot of authority if that's what you choose to do, and if that's what are in line with your goals. A durable power of attorney is the most common power of attorney. It's one that survives your incapacity, and that's when you really need it. So those are typically the documents that our office prepares. And one thing I want to note, and you should be aware of, is just this past week, new legislation regarding the power of attorney went into effect. So there's actually a new form now. So if you have an existing power of attorney that was validly executed, they're fine, they're grandfathered in. But moving forward, be on the lookout, because as financial professionals or other professionals, you may be seeing some of these come across your desk. So, just be on the lookout for it. I'm happy to answer any particular questions you have about it. But moving forward, just be aware of that. If you're executing one yourself, the form has changed, and it should be conforming to the updated standard form. You can go to the next slide.
Yeah, Deidre,
Sorry?
does that change on a regular basis? How often would something like that change?
No, it's actually, this current legislation it took years and years for it to pass. So before this, the most recent update to the form was in 2010 and 2009. But before that, the form had been pretty consistent for a couple of decades. The
Okay.
purpose of these changes is to make the form more user-friendly. The form before this was really easy to execute improperly. People would go to an attorney or someone who helped prepare it for them. They think they have a great form, and then now they're incapacitated, and the family would try to do something, and they'd be running into a lot of issues. The banking industry is now on board. They were also involved in this. So it's designed to streamline the process and have less pushback from the banks as well.
All right. So this is a positive development.
It should be a positive thing. Yes, time will tell, but it looks good so far.
Okay. Thank you.
So just a little bit about revocable trusts and guardianships. So both of these are, could be topics in and of themselves. A revocable trust is basically a document that is created and funded during your lifetime. So one of the main benefits of a revocable trust is the assets that you retitle in the name of your trust avoids probate at your passing, meaning your family or your beneficiaries don't have to go to court and be named your executor. At your passing, they automatically can sell your home. If your trust owns a home, they can collect your assets without having this delay waiting for the court. Another main benefit of a revocable trust is you can be your own trustee. So it offers you, as the person creating the trust, a lot of flexibility and a lot of control. And in the document, you also have the option to name a successor or a backup trustee who can step in and manage those assets owned by the trust in the event that you become incapacitated. So again, it provides for control and also seamless management of your assets if you lose capacity. And then finally, if you don't have a healthcare proxy, you don't have a power of attorney, and some decision needs to be made on your behalf, and you lack capacity, a guardianship proceeding is often your last resort. And I say it's a last resort because, as an attorney who does a lot of guardianships, they're not fun. They can be lengthy. You're dealing with a court proceeding, and they can get expensive because there's generally a few attorneys involved. And even if everyone's in agreement and it's not a contested proceeding, you're looking at, several months before the appointed guardian has the authority to really do anything. So it's not ideal, and something that generally can be avoided with getting a few basic estate planning documents in place.
And Deidre, on the revocable trust, because you have control, what's in that trust doesn't avoid estate taxes, correct?
Correct. It doesn't offer any estate, estate tax planning.
Right.
So for someone who has, several millions of dollars, this may not be something that they're looking to do. But if someone just has a few assets, they have their home, and they're really just looking to kind of, make their estate administration easier, kind of have all their things consolidated in one place,
Right.
and this may be a good option for them.
Okay. Thank you.
You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So something that I spend a bulk of my time dealing with is long-term care and long-term care planning. So when it comes to long-term care, these are the four basic questions. First, what is long-term care? What qualifies as long-term care? How am I going to pay for it? Because I imagine it's expensive. And a lot of people in New York look to the Medicaid program to help pay for some, if not all, of their long-term care needs. So how do I become eligible for Medicaid? And what are the criteria for becoming eligible for Medicaid? Go to the next slide, Jim.
Okay.
So first, what is long-term care? And in its most basic form, it's when an individual on a regular basis requires some assistance with their activities of daily living or their ADLs. So on the slide here are just some of the very basic ones: bathing, eating, getting around, getting in and out of chairs or bed, and using the bathroom. So things that an average person does independently, no problem. As people get older, obviously they may start needing some assistance with this. And if you're receiving care at home, you know, the aide typically will help you with these things. But as you can imagine, if as your care needs increase, or if you need help on a long-term basis, it can get really expensive. Go to the next
Deidre?
slide, Jim. Yes.
Yeah, we do have a question.
Sure.
So, question here is, does the revocable trust protect your assets from Medicaid clawbacks?
So it does, depending on what assets are titled in the name of the trust. So for example, if you just have your primary residence in the revocable trust, that type of trust will be sufficient to protect your home. So the Medicaid clawback basically refers to Medicaid estate recovery, meaning if you're a Medicaid recipient during your lifetime and you pass away with a probate estate, you pass away with some asset in your name alone at your death that does not have a beneficiary. When your family attempts to collect that asset, Medicaid, like any other creditor, has an opportunity to come forward and say, hi, remember us? We paid for your care. Now we want to get our money back. So if you avoid probate by doing something like a revocable trust, Medicaid never has an opportunity to go after your estate. So it works well with something like real property, but if you have something like cash or an investment account in your revocable trust and you need Medicaid at some point, the revocable trust does not protect the cash assets. Because you're your own trustee and you have control over the assets, those cash assets are considered an available asset to you when you're applying for Medicaid. So a Medicaid plan is obviously very fact specific. It depends on the person, their assets, what their family structure is. But, you know, to answer your initial question, it does protect against clawbacks because you're avoiding probate. And that's the only time Medicaid can come after your estate. Okay, so how are we going to pay for long-term care? So on the slide here are the very basic ways that an individual or a family finances long-term care. So the first one is private pay, which some people can do for a portion of time. They can even do it long-term, but maybe they don't want to exhaust all of their life savings paying for long-term care. Long-term care insurance, which I'm sure Jim might touch on in a little bit, but long-term care insurance, not everybody has it. If you have it, great. It may be sufficient to pay for all your needs. It may not be. So sometimes it's long-term care insurance in conjunction with either private pay or some other benefit that people utilize. Medicare pays for very limited long-term care coverage. So if you're in a hospital and you're transferred to a rehab for the purposes of physical therapy, Medicare will pay for a limited period of coverage, generally about 20 to 100 days. And then after that, you're either getting discharged if you're ready, or you're staying in the facility and figuring out how you're going to pay for the rest of the care.
My aura, I don't have a headache. I'm going to take my migraine relief now. And hopefully I don't have to go home for a while.
Okay,
Because I really just
I know
don't
you
have
don't have
time.
time.
I
Hi,
don't.
Lorraine.
You want to leave me with Brianna's the
I
script?
have to go meet with Nikki. How many do you take?
There you go.
Okay.
Pandemic
So-
rules are in effect.
Yeah. So, and then when you're discharged from a rehab, Medicare pays for some very limited care at home, typically about 4 to 6 weeks, and usually just a few hours a day. If you or your spouse were a veteran, you may be entitled to some community-based coverage, or you may be entitled to some assistance in a VA facility if you need skilled nursing care. And then finally, and most commonly for a lot of middle-class people, is the Medicaid program. So Medicaid often picks up where Medicare leaves off. So for example, if you're in a facility, you're getting some physical therapy, Medicare is exhausted, but you're just not ready to go home yet. Or maybe home is not a safe option for you. So often families will look to Medicaid to cover that type of care moving forward, because they just don't have the funds to pay for someone's care on an ongoing basis because it's really expensive. Jim, you can go to the next slide, please.
Is that it? Okay.
Yep, that's it. So when we're talking about Medicaid. There's two basic programs that an elder law attorney would help you qualify for. So there's home care Medicaid, and then there's nursing home Medicaid. And they're just like they sound. One covers care at home and one covers care in a facility. For both programs, you have the same asset limitation or asset or resource allowance rather. This year it's $15,900 for non-qualified assets. So non-qualified basically means non-retirement assets. So here Medicaid is looking at your regular bank accounts, a joint brokerage account you may have with your spouse, cash value of life insurance, stocks, bonds, regular investments. What's not counted is the value of your primary residence and qualified retirement accounts that you have. So if you have a couple of $100,000 sitting in a 401k or an IRA, the good news is you don't have to liquefy or cash in that type of account in order to qualify for Medicaid. So for a lot of people, that's good news because a bulk of their, yes.
Excuse me. So if you have a joint brokerage account, how would that count for the equation? Would only 50% of it or the entire thing?
So unfortunately, Medicaid counts, joint brokerage, joint regular bank accounts, they count the entire asset as available to the applicant because as a joint owner, you can legally go into a branch and clean out that account. So so that's a good question though, because it comes up a lot when we're, planning for spouses, or sometimes people put their adult children on an account for convenience and things like that. And then the income is treated differently whether you're in a nursing home or whether you're in the community. So if you're in a nursing home, unfortunately, there's really not a lot you can do to protect your income. And typically your income, less a very small, what they call a personal needs allowance, is owed to the nursing home as a contribution towards your care, and Medicaid picks up the balance. If you're in the community and you're getting home care, we can use something called a pooled income trust to shelter all of your income so that it remains available to you to pay your bills, utilities, basically to continue to pay the bills the way you're paying them before you apply. So one thing I want to note here too is traditionally New York has had a very generous home care Medicaid program. There was no look back period, meaning you'd be able to transfer assets and then apply for benefits or for coverage the first of the following month. So a very common plan looked like, a widow would come to our office, her spouse had predeceased her. She had 3 kids and she had, $300,000 in her name. We would be able to transfer the funds into the names of her children, and she would be eligible to apply the first day of the following month. And this allowed a lot of people to access home care coverage pretty quickly. And every year Medicaid would threaten, or New York State would threaten to make cuts to the program. And last year they finally did. So there's now going to be a 2.5-year or 30-month look back period for home care services. It's unclear when this look back is actually going to go into effect. It was supposed to start in October of last year, and they keep pushing it back. So it's looking like it won't go into effect until early next year. And I think the reason for the delay is the Department of Health does not yet have all the other forms and assessment tools in place that are supposed to also go into effect. So that buys us a little bit of time. So if someone's able to apply before the rules go into effect, they're going to be assessed under the old rules or the current rules. So if you know people who are kind of on the fence or in need of care, it may not be a bad idea to encourage them to think about it, because it's going to become more difficult in the future. And I think what's going to end up happening is people that are kind of on the cusp and they can stay home with a little bit of help, a lot of people aren't going to be able to afford it long term. So I think more people are going to end up, unfortunately, relying on nursing homes or skilled nursing facilities to, keep them safe. And we'll have to see what happens though, but just something to be aware of. And then Jim, you can go to the last slide.
Okay.
So the last topic, for an elder law attorney is often planning to make sure that your stuff, your property, your assets go where you want it to go. So these are the four basic ways that assets pass to your beneficiaries. The first is something called intestacy. And intestacy basically means you pass away in New York State and you don't have a will. So, but you have some asset in your name alone. So for example, you have 2 children, you have no spouse, and you have a house that's in your name alone. In order for your children to be able to sell that house, if you don't have a will, one of your children or both of them will have to be named the administrator of your estate. And intestacy, really, like the Family Healthcare Decisions Act, focuses primarily on your blood relationships. So if you have a spouse, a child, a grandchild that you're estranged from, or you have a child that's disabled, bad with money, maybe has a drug problem, when you're dealing with intestacy, you lose the option to do any planning for these people. So you may have a child that's a minor and you don't want them to receive property at 18, you'd prefer to hold it in trust for them. You lose the ability to do that if you pass away without a will. So that's what intestacy means. Operation of law is the easiest, most direct way that things pass to beneficiaries. And operation of law basically means that at your passing, that asset is automatically vesting in someone else, either through joint ownership or joint tenancy with rights of survivorship, or because you've named them as a beneficiary on an account, like a life insurance policy or brokerage account. The third way is a last will and testament, which I'm sure you've all heard of. A last will and testament is a document where it can be very simple and very straightforward, or it can include, more complex planning, either for tax purposes or because you want to set up trust for your beneficiaries and you want to make sure that the money is, used in a responsible way. And then finally, we touched on a little bit earlier, but trust planning. So trusts that are either set up in your will, those are called testamentary trusts, or what we call inter vivos trusts, which are basically created and funded during your life. So we spoke a bit about a revocable trust, but other types of trusts include supplemental needs trusts, when you have someone where the beneficiary is disabled or may be in need of services in the future, and an irrevocable trust, which is sometimes used for Medicaid planning or for other types of long-term care planning. So I know I just threw a lot of information at everybody. If anyone has any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to me here or, separately, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Does anyone have any questions right now? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask while we have the panel still with us. And Deirdre, I have this presentation that you guys sent to me earlier. So if okay with you, we'll send this out to the group with the recording of the presentation, as we always do.
Absolutely.
If you have any follow-up questions, you'll know how to get in touch with Deirdre and Jim after the fact.
All right. Thank you, Deirdre. That was a lot of good information, a lot to chew on.
Yes.
A word that keeps coming up is planning, which is the operative word, right? So these are the tools, and in the toolbox from my side of the aisle is I'm on the insurance planning side of, how to figure out for, we all have a movie in our head of how our life's going to turn out, and we say when we're doing planning, let's plan for just in case the movie doesn't turn out the way we think. At certain ages, I'm going to be here, I'm going to be here, I'm going to be so. That's what planning is. Let's plan for just in case. And we know that life happens, right? So we're going to talk about long-term care insurance a little bit. First, I have to get through a disclaimer. The information provided is not written as intended as specific tax or legal advice. Mass Mutual, subsidiaries, employees, and representatives are not authorized to give tax or legal advice. Individuals are encouraged to seek advice from their own tax or legal counsel, i.e. Deirdre Baker. So, long-term care insurance, life insurance, I put them in the same category. They're on the should have. We should have them. They're not the must-haves. We buy a home, we buy a car, were made to get certain types of insurance. Life insurance, long-term care, you should have, with one important distinction is life insurance. You're sitting down with a prudent person who may have a need, they'll agree, okay, there's a certainty here, let's address it and do some planning. Long-term care, there are a few things that work against. One is that it may not happen. We may not have a long-term care need, and God bless if that's the case. Also, it's a mental hurdle to get over as far as envisioning ourselves having a long-term care need, and that's all part of the equation. And the third thing is, what are we solving for? Are we solving for 6 months of home care? Are we solving for 3 years of facility? God forbid, an Alzheimer, which can be many years. So the combination of those things kind of creates a paralysis. I'm really going to talk over the slides here. This is just for, maintaining financial security. We tend to think about that as far as income when we retire. Can we have enough income that we don't outlive it? Can we keep pace with inflation? The other side of that is, if we have a long-term care need, whether individual or a couple affects both of us financially, and how will that impact us? Long-term care can be a byproduct of an accident, a chronic illness, or a cognitive impairment. If it affects one person in the family, it affects many people in the family. There's a domino effect, whether it's just a spouse or your child or children will become your caregivers, who happen to be maybe caring for their own children, they're in their own marriage or relationship. And so it's a significant impact on the entire family. And there's an emotional toll, a physical toll. And when we talk about doing planning, whether it's the things Deirdre alluded to, or from the insurance side, the one thing we can't control is the financial burden. So if we happen to have a need, let's at least do something to cushion the blow. And what is it? How much we sell for? We don't know. But using the leverage of insurance, it becomes the first line of defense. So we don't have to solve for everything because we don't know what it is, but it gives us time, buys us time to get things in order, assess the situation, and not drain our assets while dealing with the long-term care situation. Deirdre touched on the activities of daily living. Allows you to still be independent, right? Financially, and if you have someone who's a caregiver, it may be for a few hours a day in the home, doesn't have to be a licensed person at that point, but it allows you to maintain the independence you can based on the situation you deal with. Where do we receive long-term care? We touched on this earlier. Also, it can be in the home, adult daycare, assisted living, nursing home, or hospice. When we do long-term care insurance planning, we set aside a pool of money. It's not designated ahead of time for a particular need. It's a pool of money that can be used for any or all of these. And usually it's based on medical necessity. People want to stay home clearly first. So if they can, they do. But as they go up the ladder of medical necessity, then they have to go into facilities that can provide, and as Deirdre said, keep them safe. Safety is a big part of it. What are we solving for? Who knows? There's a national average. But if you live in New York or you're going to retire to South Carolina, it's the difference between the mean and the median. It doesn't matter. It's where you're going to retire. What are you going to solve for? Many times it comes down to a budget to say, what can we comfortably set aside to, again, be the first line of defense or cushion the blow if someone has a long-term care need. How will you pay for it? Again, health insurance, disability, government programs, Medicare, Medicaid. As Deirdre said, Medicare is limiting, 20 days and then certain qualifications for another 80, I believe, right up to 100 days. And then you have to buy time sometimes to maneuver your assets to become Medicaid eligible. So we tend to think of long-term care insurance as the gap, the bridge between Medicare and Medicaid to buy time and maneuver assets. So rather than take it from savings or liquid accounts or investments where it's dollar for dollar, use the leverage of long-term care insurance, and it depends on your age, right? What's the premium? So when you're younger, you may pay a nickel in premium for $1 benefit. As we get a little older, it may be a dime. a premium for a dollar in benefit, and then maybe a quarter, but it's still a leverage of the insurance as opposed to paying out of pocket. What else do we have? I really wanted to just talk about it more from a planning standpoint that, that's what I want to talk about, the industry. So for many years, the industry did a lousy job, the insurance industry, of how they solved for long-term care needs. They used to have standalone long-term care insurance. For the reasons we mentioned earlier is that you don't know what you're solving for, tough to envision. Do I want to go down that road? The other negative associated with that was if I don't use it, I lose it. So I could pay a premium for 20, 30 years. If I didn't use it, the premium went down the rabbit hole. And the fourth X factor was the insurance carriers were allowed to go back to the state insurance departments to ask for rate increases, which they did. So people in later in life on fixed incomes had significant increases. So the standalone long-term care insurance went by the wayside, which was a good thing. The positive that came out of that was you're allowed to add it as a rider to your life insurance contracts. So the cost, if you segment it out, is minimal, but you have to have the baseline of a life insurance contract. And then you can, at a later date, either access that same contract and it becomes a lien against a death benefit, or if you don't have a long-term care need, the full death benefit and or cash value can go to your heirs for full use. So that's one way to solve for it. Another is for people who may have of certain means where they may have $50,000 in a CD. So rather than just let it sit there in their mind, have earmarked that for long-term care, they can pay a single premium to a long-term care plan where 50,000 turns into 150,000, or 200 becomes a leverage and has a death benefit to it. Again, the operative word is planning. Sometimes you can even rearrange assets or use different assets. Sometimes we use the required minimum distributions from IRAs. If someone didn't need it for income, let's reroute that to find money to pay for a long-term care premium. There are, for employees of certain businesses, there are voluntary life insurance programs, which are now adding a long-term care component. It's a payroll deducted item. So it's more palatable because it's attached to life insurance. It's also easier as a payroll deducted item. It becomes part of the overall benefit package. And I'm hoping we can get some questions, because I'd like to hear from the folks. What do you think about when you think about long-term care insurance? What kind of questions do you have? How do you understand it? What does it mean to you? All good?
I don't see anything in the chat as of now, Jim.
Yeah, so I didn't want to get into the nitty gritty of, let's see how an insurance policy works specifically. I think it's a little too much. I want to just kind of talk in an overview kind of way about doing planning, why you should do it, what the hurdles are. There are some mental hurdles.
Why is the inner workings of an insurance policy not an exciting topic?
Well, it could be. It could match. If we were doing this on a Monday morning, it would match up perfectly. My goal is when we sit down with an individual or a family, that not to solve for what is the potential need, because as we said, we don't know. It's to have them in better stead after they left than when they came in. And if we can do something to the good, it helps the cause. And then, again, it buys time to maneuver assets and maybe get on some of the other programs needed, rather than have the financial burden along with the emotional burden, because it does take a toll. I mean, I'm sure everyone's experienced it in their family. It's a significant toll. I know with my own parents, I mean, thankfully with my dad, we did have Medicaid home care before the look back, and that was a godsend, you know?
Yeah.
But you know, that's all changing as these, you know, these programs that are, you know, funded by the federally and run by the state, they're all being tapped pretty heavily. So they're going to put more of a burden on us. It used to be a 3-year look back period. Now it's a 5-year look back period for certain things. And so it's only going in one direction. So I think I'm going to close with that if there are no questions. Deirdre and I are available anytime for pick our brain for consultation. We're happy to share information. Ed, thanks for having us. Deirdre, nicely done.
Thank you.
Thank you both
you,
for
Jim.
joining us today. Really appreciate it. Getting a lot of feedback in the chat. Thanking you for the information. We do have a question here. When do you typically begin long-term care planning and at what age?
It's a very good question. And I don't think it's really based on a chronological age. I think it's more of where you are on the continuum of your own life. So, and everyone's situation is different, whether it's a single person, a married person, do you have children, people having children later. So I think they're all different, but let's just say someone has a family with children, right? Or maybe they had them later in life. And so you want to take care of their college planning, right? So you want to fund for that, maybe by funding 529 plans, et cetera. Make sure your life insurance is in place. So the event of the death of one of the breadwinners, the family can stay intact financially. So when those things are taken care of, and then we're kind of thinking about retirement and what's on the horizon, it becomes part of the retirement discussion. I used to say typically north of 50, but it depends. You know, everyone's situation is different. But I think when you're looking at the retirement scenario, you know, we look at two things when we talk about retirement. And the analogy I use is, okay, if you're going to climb a mountain, what's the most important part? And everyone says getting to the top, and that would be like the accumulation of your assets, right? Everyone understands we need to save through our 401ks, IRAs, other. But actually, it's climbing down safely the other side, and that's your income, to make sure you have enough income, you don't outlive it, keep up with inflation. Well, what's part of that discussion and then is long-term care, how to protect those assets that you've taken years to accumulate and need to live on for so many years. So when we talk about the short answer is, I'm sorry if I gave you too much there, but the short answer is when you're having the retirement planning discussion, it becomes part of that as a way to preserve your assets. The age, it varies.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say that it's tough because it really depends on what your financial life looks like, what your family dynamics are, what your particular goals are. But one thing that I think helps is if you have some basic documents in place, like a healthcare proxy, a power of attorney. If you later become incapacitated, your agent, if they have the correct authority, can go to someone like Jim or Ed and say, hey, my mom is dealing with this, my dad's dealing with this. How can we start protecting what they have? I'm kind of managing things now. So that can that helps plan for some contingencies because no one knows what's going to happen.
And the biggest takeaway from you, Deirdre, I heard was in order of priority. If you did nothing else, get the healthcare proxy.
The healthcare proxy and the power of attorney. And I get it. Sometimes cost is obviously a factor. Sometimes legal services are not cheap all the time. So I often will say to someone, because a common thing we'll hear is, oh, I need a will. And then you talk to them and so I have a spouse, I want to go to them, or if he or she predeceases me to my kids. And that's great. So your will is going to basically say that anyway, and that's what the laws of intestacy will do. So if you had to pick between a will and a power of attorney, I 9 times out of 10 will tell someone you need a power of attorney, because when you're gone, your stuff is going to go, where it's going to go. But while you're alive, how are you going to get taken care of? Who's going to pay your bills? Who's going to make sure you're getting the care you need? So that's always my advice to people is a healthcare proxy and a power of attorney, because that could do a lot of other things in the future if the need arises.
Absolutely. Ed, thanks for having us. Unless
Yes,
anyone has any
thank
other
you.
questions.
Yeah. Great information. I don't see any other questions. I appreciate the two of you joining us. I am going to get this out. We'll send out this presentation and along with your contact information and the recording of this meeting. So maybe you'll have some questions, follow-up questions after that goes out, and we'll certainly get those to you. But anybody that would like to connect directly with Deirdre or Jim, please feel free to put it in the chat or reach out to me personally, and we'll make sure we get you connected with them to get your questions answered. Other than that, thanks everybody. Enjoy this beautiful weather we're having up here in the Northeast, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Have a good day. Thank
Hi,
you.
everybody. Take care.
Thank you.